Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We will begin the program by paying respect to the national anthems of the US and Japan. Good morning again, and good evening to those of you joining us from Japan. My name is Shanti Shoji, Director of Programs at Sasakawa Peace Foundation, USA. I will be your MC for today's special event, Operation Tomodachi, a 10-year commemoration. Sasakawa USA is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization dedicated to deepening the understanding of and strengthening the relationship between the US and Japan, for the benefit of a free and open international community. Its activities mainly focus on security and diplomacy through the engagement of exchanges, dialogues, analysis, publications, and networking. There are a few housekeeping things I'd like to go over. Today's event is being recorded and is on the record. A recap and video recording will be available on Sasakawa USA's website in the coming weeks. For those of you who don't speak Japanese, please click on the interpretation icon or the small globe at the bottom of your screen and select English as your language of choice. This will automatically allow you to listen to today's program in English, even if a speaker is speaking in Japanese. I'll give a few moments now for those of you who want to switch to that setting. I'll also indicate later in the program when the simultaneous interpretation is about to begin. Every year around this time, JUMP, or the Japan-US Military Program, holds an annual gathering in Washington, D.C. to bring together JUMP members to reflect on the US-Japan Security Alliance and enjoy the camaraderie of the alliance. Due to COVID-19 this year, the event is being held here virtually. It is our hope that despite being able to only gather online this year, that we can commemorate Operation Tomodachi and pay tribute to all those who lost their lives and those who showed extraordinary resiliency in the wake of the Great East Japan earthquake that shook Japan 10 years ago. It's important that we remember the tragic loss of life that occurred on March 11th, 2011, and in the days and months that followed. I know many of you here today were personally impacted by that fateful day. I'd like to take this occasion for us to all pause for a moment of silence. Thank you. I would like to now introduce Dr. Satohiro Akimoto, Chairman and President of Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA and Director of JUMP. He is also contributing writer for the Japan Times, Associate Fellow for the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London, and contributing writer for Okazaki Institute in Tokyo. Dr. Akimoto, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your introduction, Shanti. My name is Satohiro Akimoto, Chairman and President of Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. I am also Director of Japan-US Military Program, or JUMP. I am delighted to see you all. We have over 200 people attending today. Thank you very much for your interest in JUMP and the US-Japan Security Alliance. It has been 10 years since the biggest natural disaster in the several hundred years occurred in Japan. First, it was unimaginable earthquake with magnitude 9.0. Then tremendous tsunami, followed by crisis at the nuclear power plants. I would like to offer my deepest condolence to those who lost their loved ones and sympathy to those who are still struggling in the aftermath of triple disasters. JUMP, which started in 2015, is a collaboration between Embassy of Japan and the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. I would like to thank Ambassador Koji Tomita for his leadership in JUMP at the embassy. We also collaborate with the National Association of Japan-American Societies and the local Japan-American societies in local events around the country. The purpose of JUMP is twofold. First, JUMP would like to recognize the dedication of American servicemen and women in Japan and their contribution to US-Japan Security Alliance. We would like to thank American service veterans who have been to Japan, come back with a warm feeling about Japan and the Japanese people. They are by far the largest number of Americans who have a true tomodachi in Japan. Second, JUMP would like to continuously reinforce the importance of the US-Japan Security Alliance. The United States and Japan are natural allies, as the two great nations share same values that support the foundation of our respective societies, such as democracy, freedom, rule of law, free enterprise, and transparency. The JUMP would like to help the US military veterans continue to support the US-Japan Security Alliance long after they come back to the United States. I would like to thank Admiral Patrick Walsh and General Ryoichi Oriki for their leadership during the darkest days in Japanese history. I am delighted to have them as a featured speaker today. We have also invited several speakers who have played key roles in Operation Tomodachi on the military front. They are going to talk about strengths of the US-Japan Security Alliance through their joint experiences in Operation Tomodachi. I would like to introduce them later. Talking about Great East Japan earthquake is not easy for me. It is personal. My families are originally from Tohoku. My paternal families are mostly from Fukushima. My maternal families are mostly from Miyagi. Both Fukushima and Miyagi were hard hit by triple disasters. My maternal grandfather grew up in Ishinomaki. I used to live with him under the same roof in Tokyo. I went Ishinomaki a year after triple disaster. It was total destruction of the city. Everything was gone, nothing was left. I could not even recognize the city. You may remember Miss Taylor Anderson, one of the two young Americans who lost their lives in triple disasters. She tragically perished in the city of Ishinomaki. But everywhere I went in Tohoku, as a part of a private sector relief efforts, I heard many stories about Japanese people who were searched and rescued by American servicemen and women through Operation Tomodachi. It is important to remember it was not a peacetime relief effort. It was a military operation in real battle. I would like to thank all the US servicemen and women who fought hard in battle to help Japanese people, despite personal danger and the risks, from bottom of my heart. So thank you very much for joining us today. I look forward to having a great event, celebrate the trusted relationship between US and Japan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akimoto. I would now like to introduce our first distinguished speaker that we have here with us today. His Excellency Koji Tomita, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Japan to the United States of the Embassy in Japan here in Washington, D.C. Ambassador Tomita's diplomatic career in the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spans 40 years. Most recently, he served as Japan's ambassador to Korea, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's personal representative for the G20 summit in Osaka, and ambassador to Israel. His other overseas postings have included London and Paris. His relationship with the United States began when he studied in North Carolina for a year in college. Since he entered MOFA, he also held leadership positions in US-Japan relations, including Director General of MOFA's North American Affairs Bureau and Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C. Also, Ambassador Tomita has published 2 books, Churchill, Leadership in Crisis, and Margaret Thatcher, Iron Lady Who Changed Politics. The latter won the Yamamoto Shichihei Award. Ambassador Tomita, I'd like to call you onto the virtual stage, please. Yoroshiku onegai itashimasu.
Good day to you all. First, let me thank Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA for hosting this event. And let me also express my appreciation to Admiral Walsh and General Oriki for their participation. I've been doing a number of virtual events that commemorate March the 11th. I talk about the enormity of the disaster, the lives lost, damage caused, the help given, the reconstruction that is progressing. The other day, I recorded the video where I mentioned that the tsunami sent waves as high as a 12-story building slamming into us. Getting hit with a 12-story wave is a good analogy of how we in Japan first felt. Japan was an advanced, developed nation. We had the world's most sophisticated earthquake and tsunami early warning system. And yet we were sent reading from the magnitude of the disaster. Although I must express my deep admiration for the dignity and resilience displayed by many Japanese at that time, particularly those in the affected areas. Then US forces came to our assistance through Operation Tomodachi, which aptly describes our relationship. We've all heard the saying, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Japan was in need, and the United States came to our aid. Japan was knocked back, and in crucial hours, days and weeks after the disaster, the United States helped us get back on our feet. Before that terrible March the 11th day, Japan and the US certainly had built a relationship of trust and alliance. But Operation Tomodachi reaffirmed our bond on a more human and personal level. It added a new dimension to our friendship. Normally, when I talk about the Japan-US alliance, I talk about its critical role in securing Japan's defense and in maintaining the peace and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region. But beyond the strategic, beyond the geopolitical, what our alliance did, what the United States did during the March of the 11th disaster was to deepen the heart of our friendship. Japan wants to maintain this warm connection. In 2015, the embassy launched JAMP, the Japan-US military program, to support our alliance from the grassroots level, the friendship level. JAMP hosts events for US military personnel and their families who have been stationed in Japan. Thousands of US forces were serving in Japan during the earthquake and tsunami. They came to our aid. They will forever remember it. And we Japanese, we remember it too. And we will be always grateful. In closing, thank you very much for inviting me, for holding this event, and for supporting the friendship and alliance between our two countries.
Ambassador Tomita, thank you for those heartening remarks. You captured it well when you said the alliance deepened the heart of our friendship. The United States is lucky to have you as the ambassador of Japan here in Washington, and we all look forward to working with you to further strengthen the US-Japan relationship. Thank you so much. Next, we have remarks from Major General Hiroyuki Sugai, Defense and Air Attaché at the Embassy of Japan here in Washington, D.C. Major General Sugai has made his career as a maintenance officer in the Japan Air Self-Defense Force with over 25 years of service, especially in the field of maintenance, acquisition, and research and development. Recently, he served as the Deputy Director at the Defense Policies and Program Division, the Air Staff Office, the Japan Ministry of Defense, where he led programs to develop JGSDF space operation capabilities. From 2015 to 2017, Major General Sugai served as a Japan Air Self-Defense Force Liaison Officer to the Pentagon, as well as a fellow at the Brookings Institution here in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, Major General Sugai cannot be here with us today due to a temporary duty assignment, but has sent us a video message to share with you all.
I'm honored to have the opportunity to make some remarks at today's JAMP event. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to everyone for hosting this event. This coming March 11th is the 10th anniversary of the East Japan Great Earthquake, which caused a tsunami in wide area of Tohoku, northeast part of Japan. This disaster robbed us, our loved ones, our family, and our friends. Even now, when I think of unprecedented loss suffered by so many countless people, I share their sorrow. I offer up once my condolences to those who lost their beloved ones. Today is indeed a somber occasion, but let us not forget that today is also the 10th anniversary of Operation TOMODACHI, where the United States Armed Forces, especially US Forces Japan, support a Japan that was dazed and reeling following the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. At our darkest hour, the United States reached out a hand and helped us back on our feet. Their provision of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief was proof to the Japanese people of the deep bond shared between our two countries. Both then and now, we remain tomodachi. And even as the world around us changed drastically, we will continue to face these new challenges arm in arm with that very same spirit of friendship and cooperation. Programs like JAMP are crucial for maintaining and fostering such friendship. That is why I am so happy to be here today at this important JAMP event. Thank you everyone for attending as well. And thank you very much for time and attention.
Thank you, Major General Sugai, for reminding us of the strong spirit of friendship that the militaries of the US and Japan shared 10 years ago and continue to share today. Next, I'd like to introduce our first keynote speaker, Admiral Patrick M. Walsh. Admiral Walsh is a senior advisor in Oliver Wyman's Global Aerospace and Defense Services practice based in Dallas, Texas, and is a retired four-star admiral. As the 59th Vice Chief of Naval Operations, he served as a member of the Deputy Secretary of Defense-led Joint Requirements Oversight Council and provided testimony to the House Armed Services Committee, Senate Armed Services Committee, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and the Sea Power Subcommittee. He held significant leadership positions across a 34-year career to include command of U.S. Pacific Fleet, the largest naval force in the world, where he led the U.S. military response to the Great East Japan earthquake. Admiral Walsh, I'd like to welcome you to the virtual stage. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's terrific to be here today with friends and colleagues to remember on the somber occasion, Operation Tomodachi. You know, in my years of service in operations and deployments around the world, I don't think I'd ever experienced anything close to what we witnessed in the days that followed the Great Eastern Japan earthquake. The forces that moved the Eurasian plate physically displaced Japan and lowered the Honshu coastline by more than a meter. It caused damage, loss of life, and a series of casualties that were apocalyptic in magnitude, in description and effect for the prefectures of Fukushima, Iwate, and Miyagi. Yet it's in that time of crisis, it's in that hour of tragedy, confusion, and chaos that we learn about ourselves as well as the brotherhood of humanity. If history ever records where there was a time and place to learn about the commitment to our fellow man, it will be Japan, where more people came to the scene of the disaster to offer assistance than those who departed to avoid the damage caused by the earthquake, tsunami, and radiation disaster. Where record numbers of citizens mobilized to rescue, to find the missing, and to sustain the living. Where dedicated workers, simply known as the Fukushima 50, captured the heart of the nation and inspired the world into action. Despite the incalculable personal loss in grieving for their own loved ones, the Japanese Self-Defense Force carried a deep sense of personal honor and responsibility for the mission. And by any and every measure, they were bold, dynamic leaders who faced down uncertainty. Their work was truly heroic, and it earned the gratitude and the respect of nations around the world. If history ever records a time and place to witness the wrath of nature, where nature, the wrath of nature, met the best of humanity, it was Sendai, where the chaos of the sea confronted the orderly life of the city, where the giant wave churned and pushed itself more than 10 kilometers inland, and then pulled everything within its reach back out to sea, where every man-made object, regardless of its size or its weight or its setting, moved to the most unlikely, unpredictable, and implausible locations, tossed without regard to its size or its dimension. The forces of nature exposed the vulnerability and laid bare the orderly life of our lives with the confused pictures of commercial tankers on land and homes and automobiles pulled out to sea. But in Sendai, that same powerful wave summoned an equally powerful force, the essential purity and resolute spirit of the Japanese people, possessed of the wish for peace and security, yet emotionally resolved to meet any challenge and willing to commit themselves for the rest of their lives to build a future for their children with politeness, patience, and prudence. If history ever records a time and place to witness an impressive operation, to witness a team in action, and to witness heartfelt commitment without concern for credit, it will be Operation Tomodachi, where the USS Ronald Reagan Strike Group joined forces with Yokosuka and Sasebo sailors, Okinawa Marines, Zama soldiers, Yokota and Misawa airmen, with more than 50 non-governmental organizations, ministries of the government of Japan, the Self-Defense Force, the U.S. Agency for International Development, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Chemical, Biological, Initial Response Force from U.S. Northern Command, and many, many, many others in a unified effort on behalf of our friends. While none of us could have predicted or prepared for this cascading set of conditions, the mark of an impressive organization is the ability to learn and grow under pressure, and during crisis conditions, adapt, improvise, and in this case, pivot from humanitarian assistance to missions in response to the nuclear disaster, to fight the fear of the unknown and the invisible with a force that could land on its feet within hours of the unprecedented crisis, improve beyond measure what it means to be a friend. When Defense Minister Kitazawa visited USS Ronald Reagan, he conveyed the personal gratitude of the Prime Minister to the US Armed Forces for their remarkable, timely, and sustained support. And then he added, "Your warm help will be cherished and forever ingrained in the hearts and souls of the Japanese people." The complexity and the scope of the humanitarian and radiological challenge required innovative solutions. So we organized ourselves for unity of effort and established the Joint Support Force. It was an arrangement based on collaboration, transparency, and coordination, rather than what you would expect to find in a traditional arrangement based on authority and relationships organized for unity. We needed solutions, and those solutions needed to be integrative among the multiple services, the ministries, the agencies, and organizations. And therefore, each critical department at our headquarters in Yokota, as well as in the Self-Defense Force headquarters in Ichigaya, US and Japanese liaison officers worked side by side for every meeting, for every decision, and for every day of the operation. The understanding and the sharing of technical information was also critically important and required the active involvement of medical practitioners, public health experts, nuclear technicians, regulators, military contractors, logisticians in the field, as well as airport and seaport experts, expeditionary engineers, pilots, salvage experts, and military operators, and many, many more. Our Ambassador Roos and his team at the US Embassy became the hub for US activity, for leadership, and for countless around-the-clock meetings, communications with everyone from national leaders to anxious citizens in the international audience. All of us were grateful for their service, their poise, and their leadership during the crisis. In the meantime, our military counterparts, leaders of the Self-Defense Force, shouldered the pressure of an incredible burden. Chief of Defense General Oriki and Joint Support Force Liaison Officer Major General Bancho, along with General Kimizuka, were strong, unflappable leaders who were in the right place at precisely the right time, and I was indeed lucky to work closely with them. While the Joint Support Force may have set records for its responsiveness and delivery of supplies, it also required extraordinary levels of technical skill and communication to respond and to address the radiological crisis. But what made it truly exceptional, in my judgment, was that it was not simply the narrative of a military operation. It was much, much more. What made the operation unique and remarkable and special in its own right was the promise and the potential of the idea of Tomodachi. We have an American historian, author, philosopher, and lecturer. His name is Jacob Needleman. And in his work, The American Soul, I find it instructive, and it informs us even today. His quote is, "Great ideas begin with an ache. The physical and the emotional loss was hard to comprehend in Japan that day, much less calculate. In these circumstances, the name of the military operation took on an even greater degree of tangible and symbolic meaning, especially since it was a word that represented so much more than the simple execution of military operations." In this author's words, the mark of great ideas is that they act to unify the disparate parts of the human spirit and have the power to bind people together. Tomodachi taught us something I don't think we even expected. It taught us what was possible. The idea was powerful because it represented in its purest form what our partnership meant and what it could become, based on a vision of what humanity is and what it could become. Interestingly, the vision and the drive to move our two countries to a closer understanding of each other predates the event and predates us by more than 100 years. At least one example to consider that demonstrates the roots of our friendship dates back to the late 19th century when Nitobe Inazo expressed the desire to bridge the two sides of the Pacific. In 1905, he published Bushido, The Soul of Japan, for Western audiences in an effort to reflect the true spirit of Japanese people and to shape a closer relationship between the United States and Japan. Two books, The American Soul and The Soul of Japan, two works, two sources of insight, separated by thousands of miles and more than 100 years, both make an effort to understand the psyche of our respective cultures, our respective societies, and our respective people. With that understanding, finding the key to unlock the promise and the potential of a partnership between nations and a close friendship between people. Tomodachi taught us that nations have interests, but people have friends. And this disaster demonstrated for all to see that we will take risks for our friends. For as long as there are real challenges ahead and real work to be done, as long as there is suffering, as long as there are people in need, and as long as there are forces that challenge peace and prosperity, our work together must continue. As long as we make commitments to each other and resolve to stand for each other, our friendship will endure, and the spirit embodied in that friendship will never wither and die. I speak for my colleagues when I say that we are humbled by the gratitude and the graciousness of the Japanese people, and that we will cherish the honor of this experience in a profound and very personal way. Those who participated in Operation Tomodachi will always remember our time together and the contribution that we were fortunate to make to our fellow man and all that we learned under these very remarkable circumstances. For those who have been so grateful to us, we want you to know that the graciousness of the Japanese people will be cherished and forever ingrained in our hearts. We feel that we should thank you as well, because our mission together and our relationship will always be the source of pride for the rest of our lives. I am proud of our work, our team, and I am so thankful that we will always remember and have a chance to stand together as true Tomodachi. Thank you, my dear friends. God bless you, our team, and all those who stand with us. Thank you.
Admiral Walsh, what a touching recount of your time as commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet at such a trying time in Japan's history. Your stories of resiliency and collaborative service are uplifting and a true testament to the deep bonds of friendship the U.S.-Japan alliance shares. I also really took interest to your quote that nations have interest and people have friends. This is so true. Thank you so much for your leadership. Last, but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome General Ryoichi Oriki, who served as Chief of Staff of the Joint Staff of Japan Self-Defense Forces, a position assumed in 2009. In this capacity, he commanded JSDF's responses to North Korea's Nodong missile launches and the deployment of counter-piracy enforcement forces off the coast of Somalia in 2019, as well as JSDF's operations in the aftermath of the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake. Since retiring from JSDF in 2012, he has assumed a number of positions, such as Special Advisor to the Ministry of Defense, and currently serves as Space Policy Committee member of the Japan's Cabinet Office, among others. General Oriki is also a board member of Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. Before General Oriki begins, if you would like to listen to his keynote in English, please be sure to click on the interpretation icon or the small globe at the bottom of your screen and select English. General Oriki, I'd like to invite you to the virtual stage. The floor is yours. どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
皆さん、おはようございます。今日は在米国日本大使館と笹川米国の共催によるジャンプイベントに参加する機会をいただきましてありがとうございます。新しく着任をされた富田大使、秋元会長、そして友達作戦の司令官としてご尽力をいただいたウォルシュ大将にも久しぶりにお会いでき、感謝とともに大変嬉しく思います。近年の日本にとって最大の国家的危機であり、多くの犠牲者を出した東日本大震災が発生をして10年が経ちました。この大震災に際して、震災直後から支援をいただいた米国政府、米国民の皆さん、そして当時のルース大使をはじめとする在日米国大使館の皆さん、友達作戦の現場で活動してくれた多くの米軍の友人の皆さんに改めて感謝をしたいと思います。現在の被災地は復興も進んでいますが、本来の姿に戻るには、福島原発の廃炉問題をはじめ、いまだに多くの課題を抱えています。先月13日には福島を中心として東日本大震災の余震といわれる震度6強の地震があり、150名以上の負傷者を出しました。大きな地震は被災地はもちろんほとんどの日本国民にとってまだまだ当時を思い出すトラウマとなっています。東日本大震災は地震津波災害と福島原発の複合災害となり、防衛省にとっても現場で活動した自衛隊にとってはもちろん、防衛大臣をはじめとした総力戦となりました。自衛隊にとって最大10万7千人という派遣規模はもちろん、活動内容の 多様性、厳しさ、初めての放射線の下での活動、米軍との共同対処等の観点からも、総隊以来最大の作戦となりました。被災地では、自衛隊の災害派遣では初めて統合任務部隊を編成をして対応しました。東幕にとっては、東幕が総隊をされてまだ5年目でした。それまでは実際的な統合運用という観点からは、北朝鮮の弾道ミサイル対処のための経験しか実際的にはありませんでした。そのような中で、発災後、米軍は空母ロナルド・レーガン等からなる最大1万6000人から参加した友達作戦を速やかに展開し、被災者目線で心のこもった支援をしていただきました。我々も米国の素早い決断と米軍の機動力には非常に驚きました。発災後、もう2日後には空母ロナルド・レーガンをはじめとする米軍が被災地の沖まで進出をしてくれました。この動きはその後の米軍の活動も含めて周辺の国々に対して日米同盟の強固さを示すことにもなりました。24日以降は日本で起きた震災のために米軍として初めて統合支援部隊 JSF を編成をして対処してもらいました。もちろん、指揮官はウォルシュ隊長であります。提督からは日本政府、そして自衛隊に対する支援ということを軸にして、心細やかにサポートしていただいたことに心から感謝をしています。友達作戦は自衛隊と米軍の絆の強さの表れです。それは今もオンラインで視聴されている日本で自衛隊と一緒に勤務されたことのある多くの軍人の皆様はじめ、長年の日米共同訓練や指揮官同士、あるいは幕僚間の対話や交流を通して相互の信頼感が生まれ、それがつながり、それが大きな要因だと思っています。私自身も在日米軍司令官であったフィールド中将はじめ、歴代の在日米軍司令官、あるいは太平洋軍司令官のウィラード提督とも機会を求めて日本やハワイで戦略協議を行っていました。もちろん、マレン統合参謀本部議長とも同様であります。いわゆる気心の知れた仲という親密な人と人との関係の大切さであり、それが日米同盟を支えている大きな要素であることを改めて認識をしています。大きな部隊が作戦を始めると、情報共有と情報共同対応のために相互調整が非常に重要になります。日米の調整は、発災当日深夜にはすでに在日米軍司令官が指示を出され、連絡幹部が駆けつけてくれました。在日米軍司令部を中心にして、翌日から在日の米陸海空海兵隊の各軍と自衛隊の調整が始まりました。24日、JSF の立ち上げ後は、市ヶ谷と横田の在日米軍司令部はもちろんですけれども、仙台の東北方面総監部に日米調整所を設置をして、活動に関する緊密な調整を開始をいたしました。この日米調整所を視察をした防衛大臣はじめ、日本の高官は、日米の軍人が何の違和感もなく、当たり前のようにお互いに調整をスムーズに行っている様子を見て、自衛隊と米軍の緊密さが強く印象に残ったようです。震災から4年後の2015年には、日米ガイドラインの協議において、日米の同盟調整メカニズムが改正をされ、 平時から継続的に政策、運用面での調整が強化されるようになりました。また、米軍の大規模災害の対処における協力や災害訓練への参加が謳われました。それらの結果として、2016年の九州・熊本の大地震、2017年前後の頻繁な北朝鮮の弾道ミサイル発射、そして現在に至る尖閣諸島における中国の必要な活動などについて、同盟調整メカニズムを活用しながら緊密な連携が取られています。そこで友達作戦の活動について少し述べてみます。発災直後から被災地での生活支援、学校、鉄道などの復旧支援、そして仙台空港の早期復旧などのために、米軍の陸海空海兵隊の能力を存分に発揮をしてもらいました。実は私の本音で言えば、米軍が日本の実際の被災者の中で活動するのは初めてであり、その関わり方も含めて心配をしていたことも事実ですけれども、それは全く心配することはなく終わりました。友達作戦の現場において、米軍人の皆さんが被災者の立場、日本人の目線で一緒に生活支援や復旧活動をしてくれました。米軍に対する被災者の感謝と信頼の気持ちは、冒頭に流されたビデオ映像や、たくさん残っている多くの記録写真に現れています。その中にある特に子どもや老人の目を見ればよく理解できることだと思います。ウォルシュ提督にもルス大使やウィラード太平洋軍司令官とともに学校などの避難所の被災者を激励をしていただきました。ウォルシュ提督には整然とした避難所や予想もしていなかった被災者からのお礼の拍手など、被災者の起立心や心の豊かさなどを褒めていただきました。そして友達作戦に参加したことは米軍にとっても意義があったというコメントをいただいたことは、私にとっても日本人としても大変嬉しいことでした。福島原発においては、米国政府、それから米軍から原子炉等に関するさまざまな専門的知見等を政府関係省庁、自衛隊に提供をしてもらいました。自衛隊は原子力空母も原子力潜水艦も保有していないために、原発に関する知見が限定される中で、米軍専門家の知見に加え、例えばグローバルフォークやモニタリング装置の運用、そしてワシントンからはシーバーフが派遣され、大きな助けとなりました。その一方で、震災直後から日米の合同調整回廊が立ち上がるまでの約10日間は、福島原発の情報共有問題を主として、日米両政府の間で深刻な事態を招いていました。一部では日米同盟の危機とまで言われました。この状況の中で日米の絆をつなぎ止め、強固にしていったのが自衛隊と米軍であり、また両国の外交・防衛関係者の努力であったと理解をしています。これにはもちろん在日米軍の存在も大きなものでありました。今後、日米両政府が共同して対処すべき厳しい事態に直面したとき、福島原発事故は大きな教訓を与えてくれます。震災対応を行いながら、日本周辺の他国軍の動きも気がかりでした。 東日本大震災への対応の裏では、東シナ海において海上自衛隊の護衛艦に対して中国公船からのヘリコプターや小型機が異常接近をし、あるいはロシアの電子偵察機、戦闘機の活発な活動があり、自衛隊にとっては予期はしていたものの、警戒監視活動の強化を余儀なくされました。限られた自衛隊の勢力に加えて、米軍が友達作戦を遂行しつつ、東アジア全般の警戒監視活動を遂行していることは力強い限りでした。最後に、在日米軍司令官であったフィールド空軍中将のエピソードをお話をして終わりにしたいと思います。3月12日以降、福島原発も状況がだんだん悪くなり、在日の米国民の自主避難が始まる中で、彼は女性の通訳に言いました。君と僕は日本を離れる最後の米国人だ。横田の司令部がダメになったら、影響のない名古屋に司令部を移して最後まで活動すると話されたと、後から聞きました。ここまでの覚悟で日本を支援してくれたフィールド中将の強い思いと、ウォルシュ大将が指揮をされた米軍に当時の統幕長として、一人の軍人として改めて感謝をしたいと思います。米国政府と米軍の支援は、日米同盟を体現をした本当の意味の友達作戦でした。友達作戦に関わった多くの米軍の将兵、関係者の皆さん、そして今日まで日米関係強化にご尽力をいただいた多くの米国軍人の方々に心から感謝をしたいと思います。本日はどうもありがとうございました。
General Oriki, thank you. It has been our distinguished honor to hear from you and Admiral Walsh about your time together under Operation Tomodachi. It is clear that both of you formed not only a steadfast partnership, but a true lifelong friendship. We all are forever grateful for the leadership you and Admiral Walsh provided at time of such great need. Thank you. I'd like to now turn the program over to Dr. Akimoto. Dr. Akimoto, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shanti. I would like to invite 4 distinct speakers who played a critical role in the success of Operation Tomodachi in the discussion period. First, I'd like to invite Lieutenant General Burton Field. He became commander of the U.S. forces in Japan in October 2010, 6 months prior to the Great Eastern Japan earthquake. He was on scene and physically in Japan throughout the traumatic events and carried out Operation Tomodachi with Admiral Walsh, General Oriki, and others by operationalized massive joint support force. Lieutenant General Field, floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Akimoto. It's an honor to be here today and to speak to such a distinguished group. Let me just tell you up front that it's never easy to follow my friends, Admiral Walsh and General Oriki. They're very powerful speakers, and I always learn something when I listen to them. Today, I just want to talk really briefly about the initial actions that we took at U.S. Forces Japan headquarters in coordination with our partners, the Japanese Self-Defense Force. During that day, after the earthquake had occurred and the tsunami struck the coast, and as we were beginning to see what the true extent of the damage just from the tsunami, and then as the nuclear disaster began to unfold starting the following day on March 12th, we thought that perhaps we needed a couple guiding principles. And I think that Admiral Walsh laid him out pretty well in terms of, being collaborative and transparent and cooperative with our partners. And I came up with 3 things that needed to guide our actions through the coming days, weeks, and months. The first of them is I always assumed that the government of Japan would be able to make it through this crisis and be better on the other side of it. And I knew that what we needed to have also happen at that time is that when the crisis was over, we needed to ensure that the US actions and the Japanese actions as we work through this were designed to strengthen our alliance so that when the disaster was over, even though it's still ongoing in many parts of Japan today, that our alliance, the US-Japan alliance, would be strengthened. The second thing that I knew that we needed to make very clear to our team was that we were the supporting element. Japan and the Japanese Self-Defense Force were very qualified and could handle the disaster without any of our help, frankly. But I knew that we could provide some support to them, and we needed to make sure that even in times of crisis, we needed to make sure as friends that we didn't want to overpower anybody, which is something that the US side can do in times of crisis. And when Admiral Walsh arrived in Japan, he agreed with that. And that was why Admiral Walsh decided to name the command the Joint Support Force, to make very clear to the Japanese that we were supporting their efforts and we would do whatever we could to help them through this crisis. And finally, I thought, and we talked in our headquarters, that's all well and good, the political aspects of this. But what this effort was really about was individual Japanese people, the individuals that were affected through this tragic turn of events in this terrible, terrible disaster, whether it was on the radiological side, whether it was on the earthquake side, or whether it was the devastation that was wreaked by that tsunami that hit the coast of Japan. So whenever things were hard in our headquarters, whenever there was a problem, whenever tempers were short, we would just remind ourselves that somewhere there were thousands of Japanese people that were homeless, that were destitute, that had lost loved ones, that had no idea sometimes whether those loved ones would ever be found again. And we knew that as bad as we thought our situation was, somewhere out there, a Japanese person had it worse, and our job was to find that person and help them. So that's kind of how we worked through our headquarters in times of trial. I would like to say also that in that initial days, my first phone call was, I think, to General Oriki in that afternoon of March 11th. And we discussed some of these concepts, and he laid out what his priorities were and where he thought we could help. Once I had that, and I talked to, I knew that his staff of Admiral Kawano, Major General Hironaka, General Isobe, and then the other parts of the self-defense force led by the Air Self-Defense Force led by General Iwasaki. I knew that our team needed to mobilize to help. And we had a bunch of very like-minded men in command of a bunch of the US units at the time. Scott Van Buskirk actually, I believe, was in Singapore at the time. And as soon as he heard the news of the earthquake, he set sail for Japan. The other, Michael Harrison from the Army, Rick Wren on the Navy side, Ken Gluck from down in Okinawa, all of us talked immediately as soon as we could on that Friday afternoon and mobilized our forces to move up to Honshu, to base out of the American bases up there where we could, so that we were positioned to begin that support effort wherever the Japanese Self-Defense Force and the government of Japan needed that. We didn't really ask for permission to do that because we knew that the US government would definitely be in line with supporting that. And in fact, you know, our bosses in Hawaii, Admiral Willard and General Gary North, were supportive and actually pushed more and more resources to us as we went through this disaster, trying to support the Japanese people. And just finally, I know that we're going to hear from General Bancho in a little bit, but I think that the other thing that came out of this, and General Oriki mentioned it briefly, is the teams that we exchanged to increase our communication and collaboration. General Bancho led a Japanese team that came to our headquarters, and they were included in everything that we talked about, every single thing. There was no secrets from that team in Japan, and they were able to share all of that instantly back to the headquarters or wherever they needed to get that information. And likewise, we sent a team led by our Deputy Brigadier General Blake Crow down to Ichigaya, and they were met with the same kind of transparency, openness, and collaboration. And I think that as both Admiral Walsh and as General Oriki emphasized, it was this personal relationship. It's the personalities of the people involved. It was the fact that we knew that there were thousands and thousands of people that needed help that really focused our efforts. And we had no issues with personalities or organizational problems that put up roadblocks. And anytime that there was something that we hadn't thought about, people came together and solved those problems pretty quickly. And I'd just like to close by thanking, again, the opportunity to speak today. And I will tell you that the biggest lesson that I learned from Operation Tomodachi, of the many that I found out, was that whenever I hear of somebody having a hard time, whenever I hear of somebody going through a tough time in their life, I always think back to how, if you want to find out how to handle a disaster with grace, honor, and courage, you need to look no farther than the Japanese people, because that is exactly how they handled that crisis and that disaster. And it's the biggest lesson that I took with me. And I am and always will be grateful that I was a small part of the effort to support them in their time of need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, General Field, and thank you very much also for your determination to help Japanese people in the time of crisis, and also your commitment to the Japan Security Alliance. If I remember correctly, and also I'd like to thank you for your very thoughtful comment about the U.S. Forces' attitude toward Japanese people in Operation Tomodachi. If I remember correctly, I think it was General Oriki who said Admiral Walsh, when the Operation Tomodachi was over, that he was grateful that the U.S. forces came in from back door and quietly left from back door. So thank you very much. I would like to invite Vice Admiral Van Buskirk. Vice Admiral Van Buskirk was a commander of U.S. 7th Fleet. He was actually visiting in Malaysia when the disaster happened. He immediately rushed back to Blue Ridge in Singapore and rushed back to Japan next morning with full of relief goods. He quickly operationalized most of the U.S. 7th Fleet in Operation Tomodachi, despite risks from nuclear materials in the air and in the ocean. Vice Admiral Van Buskirk, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Akimoto. And I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you very much to Ambassador Tomita and you, Dr. Akimoto, and as well as Shanti, for hosting this event and to continue this legacy of Tomodachi between our two great nations. I'd like to really talk a little bit about this alliance a little bit, and the fact that we should remember at the time of Tomodachi, we had just come off celebrating 60 years of our alliance together. And many different kanpai toasts had been given. And what was unique about those celebrations were that we were really celebrating our defense and security relationship along the way. But really what Operation Tomodachi did, it brought to the forefront this notion of friendship. And I think I'd like to just settle on that notion for a second. We've talked about alliances and partnerships. Well, Tomodachi now has brought friendship or Tomodachi up equal to, I think, those two words when we talk about our relationship together. And I think that's very, very, very important. I was reminded about that during the operation itself. I was provided a story about up in Misawa, where many of our US and Japanese servicemen and women and their families who lived in the Misawa area had gone out into town to really help with the assessment and cleaning up and helping wherever they could to recover, the Japanese people to recover from this disaster. But it was an elderly gentleman who came up to one of the young American service members there and said, you know, I always thought about you as neighbors, but now I think about you as friends. And so I think that just kind of highlighted really this notion of Tomodachi, which we all knew was at the background of our relationship. It certainly was to me, with the two people I worked closely with the most, Admiral Kuramoto and Admiral Takashima, throughout my tour in Japan. We forged a certainly a relationship that was built on our two respective services, but it became quickly one about friendships. And that was really echoed in how we communicated with each other throughout this operation. We had the personal relationships already established. We could pick up the phone and talk to one another. And in fact, just that previous year, we had established a liaison officer in each one of our staffs, which was permanently embedded in that staff. And we would go to each other's command briefings each week. So we had that relationship that I think, which was embodied certainly from our two nations' defense relationships. But now I think really we're celebrated by Tomodachi to be really a true friendship. And I think that's clearly what struck me the most in this was really the validation of how important our alliance is, and no doubt it's the cornerstone of peace and stability in the region. And it's more so today than even in 2011. But we also had the opportunity to see how well in a time of crisis, our two great nations could work seamlessly together and work side by side. In this case, in our support to the government of Japan. And I think lastly, I think it's important to note that this was a uniquely a disaster that affected not just the families of the people of Japan, but our families. Bert Fields, my great friend who knows that, Bert Field knows that really well. I mean, our families were there. Our families were part of it. They experienced it. And so there was a personal issue that was really there as well. And that we were really in this together, truly as almost one nation, working side by side to really work through this. So I think I certainly cherish the opportunity to have worked with as 7th Fleet Commander with my counterparts. I mentioned Admiral Kuramoto, Admiral Takashima, and all the great people of Japan, and all the men and women who were with me throughout my tenure there. So again, thank you for this opportunity, and really think we should all be very thankful of our alliance, our partnership, and our Tomodachi.
Thank you very much, Vice Admiral Van Buskirk. Thank you for your commitment to US-Japan Security Alliance and your service. I would like to invite General Koichiro Bancho. General Bancho and his team play a major role in communication and coordination with the US Joint Support Force by physically stationing at the Yokota during Operation Tomodachi. He was one of the key people working with the United States forces to enable seamless activities of Operation Tomodachi. General Bancho, floor is yours.
Oh, hi. Thank you very much, Akimoto-san and Shanti, for providing me such a great opportunity. And I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to Ambassador Tomita, Admiral Walsh, General Oriki, Major General Sugai, General Field, Admiral Bambaskak. Your remarks and presentations remind me of your difficult but fulfilling adventures to support Great East Japan earthquake disaster and to strengthen our alliance. On March 11th, I was in Ichigaya. As soon as earthquake occurred, I rushed to the command center and we started HADR operation to respond and cope with the unusual disaster. After a few days later, US Force upgraded its posture to support HADR mission and gave it the name of the Operation Tomodachi and the Joint Support Force. And then I was appointed to the chief of the Bilateral Coordination Center, BCC, as a subordinate of the General Oriki. So I moved from Ichigaya to Yokota and started my duties with the leadership of the Admiral Walsh, General Field, as well as the many flag officers. At the time, the general situation over Tohoku was really serious, with the area having suffered heavy damage due to the tsunami, and just after the tragic incident of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. So my mission was to assist Admiral Walsh and the Joint Support Force headquarters members and to facilitate the Japan-US coordination mechanism between Self-Defense Force and the Joint Support Force for conducting bilateral HADR missions smoothly. In other words, my role and responsibilities were to adjust the temperature of water between Japan and the United States. Actually, it was very first time to establish the BCC for Japan-US alliance. Of course, this was determined by Japan-US defense guidelines. And this organization was assumed to be created during the wartime contingency. So it was never established for HADR missions. However, BCC worked very well and smoothly. This was thanks to the very close and continuous cooperation based on our alliance for long years, as General said, and as well as the existence of the US service members and families of US Forces Japan. Furthermore, I was so impressed and encouraged during my days at Yokota. General Oriki and Admiral Walsh communicated every day and discussed how to improve such a difficult situation with effective cooperation. So I was able to witness this and was convinced that this was a true strategic communication by two great leaders. Actually, I learned a lot from these experiences during the Operation Tomodachi. And I'd like to make a couple of further comments. First is the strategic significance of the operation for maintaining regional security. After the earthquake had occurred and during the conduct of the HADR missions, we suffered due to a lot of harsh and unpleasant activities by neighboring countries, as General Oriki mentioned. In the middle of the desperate relief operations, those actions by China and Russia were frankly unbelievable. So I believe that the series of activities by Operation Tomodachi was a message to these countries which conveyed the strength of Japan-US alliance. It was not only a part of HADR at the time of the disaster, but also it had great and lasting security significance. The presence of the US forces and clear and definite demonstration of the effective bond between self-defense force and the US forces provided true deterrence. We could show off the effectiveness of our alliance. This is my unforgettable lesson learned. My second point is the great contribution of individual, nameless service members who contributed to the Operation Tomodachi. During my days in Yokota, I witnessed many episodes from actual field of operations. For example, as of the US Marine Corps, they conducted the many HRD missions, such as repair of the airport, support of the Oshima Island with their amphibious capabilities, and it would like mentioned about the CBAF, Chemical Biological Incident Response Force. They are dispatched to Japan to cope with the nuclear incident. We welcome them and coordinate mutual cooperation with JGSDF's Shiban unit. In the end, and fortunately, they did not have to conduct actual mission at Fukushima. However, they deployed to Japan and prepared for the worst case. One day, I asked the sergeant of the CBAF, I asked, if the worst situation happened, and if workers of the Fukushima nuclear power plant called Satohiro Shiban unit and US CBAF to conduct emergency rescue mission under exceeding radiation limit, what are you going to do? Then the sergeant answered immediately and very naturally, we will quickly go in and rescue them. That is the reason I came here. I was so moved to hear that they are going to take on such a dangerous task and dedicate their lives to carry out those difficult missions for Japan and for the Japanese people. As the US Navy conducted very powerful support from a sea even during the tsunami warning issued, and many naval officers who are expert in nuclear power gathered in Tokyo and provided valuable wisdom and insight for coping with the Fukushima incident. And the US Air Force conducted tremendous support with the tactical and strategic capabilities. For example, Shin-130s of the US Air Force conducted a forced landing at Sendai Airport just after the Marine Corps removed the rubble from the airfield. I think US military had clear policies to open Sendai Airport that would become a hub for logistics activities, and also to make an airport a symbol of the recovery. US Army soldiers conducted Operation Soul Train for railway restoration and clearing up schools, preparing for the opening classes, as well as conducting music and band performances to encourage refugees. And also, I'm so impressed to know that the effort their families, many families who live in US bases like Camp Zama started Operation Backpack, preparing many backpacks of daily commodity for men, women, boys, and girls, all kinds, affected by the disasters. They kindly extended their helping hand to the sufferers with careful consideration. Of course, embassy and civilians, Ambassador John Roos and many diplomats, as well as many military civilians, made great contribution to promote Operation Tomodachi. Our soldiers in Sendai appreciated what the liaison team from a US embassy did to coordinate between our two governments and to promote mutual understanding. So to look back on these 10 years, my most important and unforgettable memories are our deepest appreciation to all and individual soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen and women, civilians, and all families for their dedicated work under really severe circumstances. I believe that they were true hero and heroine. I can clearly define the alliance we share as one based on the bond of true mutual reliance and trust as fellow human beings. However, it is important to note that after 10 years have passed, recently the strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific region and the global arena is becoming increasingly unstable. In such environment, the significance of Japan-US alliance is critically important for contributing to continued deterrence and stability. Operation Tomodachi proved the significance of our alliance and demonstrated the effectiveness. So I'm very proud of speaking at this event and proud of having worked with such a great friends. My conclusion is, a friend in need is a friend in need. Thank you very much again and providing me such a great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, General Bancho, for your participation. It is well past midnight in Tokyo, and I really appreciate it. I would like to invite General Gary North. He was a commander of Pacific Air Force in Hawaii at the time of a disaster. He said his role in Operation Tomodachi was a support role, but we all know he played a very important support role. He's a friend of Japan, and he commanded 35th Operation Group in Misawa and 18th Wing in Kadena. General North, floor is yours.
So I apologize for the background. It was not what I envisioned, but I will continue to talk. It is an F-16, much like the F-2 from JGSDF, Kokujiatai. And Akimoto-san, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk and for all the distinguished leaders here. It is wonderful to see each of you virtually, and we all hope in the future as we come out of COVID-19, yet another natural disaster that Mother Nature and our good earth gives us challenges for, that we may be able to, in the coming months and certainly next year, join yet again in Sasakawa and for the remembrance. I'm reminded that I am a utility infielder, not only in my role in Tomodachi, but also today. Not a cleanup hitter, but a utility infielder. And when you have the opportunity to think last, or to talk last, you get to listen to great leaders and speakers who remember a decade ago that we had no idea on the 10th of March in 2011 that the 11th of March would present such a challenge, not only to governments, to friends, allies, families, and partners, but to the young people who experienced, who will be the leaders of our future, of both of our nations and of the many nations that contributed to the efforts from the Great East Japanese earthquake. And so my look at this from 10 years ago is really to look forward 10 years in the future. We learn from the past. I think from the Pacific Air Force's perspective, on the morning of the 11th of March, after Burt Field called and we were watching the news and the horrific tidal wave and the earthquake, we flash back collectively in the command to perhaps coming out of the Desert Storm, 1991, return of US forces, of the Bangladesh flooding, where the US Marines stopped on their way home and laid in to support the people of Bangladesh. And then from my perspective at the Pacific Air Forces, I flash back to the Boxing Day event of Southeast Asia in 2004 with the great tsunami in Southeast Asia and the results of that. And so our planners went back and pulled the response plan, the disaster relief plan, off of the shelf, and we went to work in a supporting environment. And you know, the appreciation of coming in the back door to support. Sometimes the U.S. can overwhelm with pushing assets and capability very fast to meet friends' needs. And so we all just went to work. What I would say from my perspective is to look to the future. You know, all of the speakers previous have recounted the events. I would say that, as Admiral Walsh says, there was adaptation, there was improvisation, there was a pivot from day-to-day operations in the Pacific from all of our nations. I think the most important part of those three pieces is, you know, the people of Japan, both the civil, the military, the adjunct communities, disaster release efforts, with support from literally the world, overcame. And they overcame, as Burt Field said, there was grace, there was honor, there was courage. But most importantly, from my perspective, having served twice and learned in our time, our family's time in Japan, both in Misawa and Okinawa, there was great dignity by the Japanese people. In times of the worst peril that their generation would experience, the dignity of the Japanese people and the respect for each other and the common good showed the world that in the worst economic disaster to date, the Japanese people stood shoulder to shoulder, young and old, supported each other, and showed the world that in the worst peril, they would overcome. And so, you know, from a supporting role, the pride of the ability to support and help and overcome the challenges was just amazing. And I flash back to several things. Bancho-san talked about how a U.S. Special Operations Force C-130 landed at Sendai. I will never forget the pictures of that airplane landing on the airfield with mud encrusted still on the airfield, and airmen jumping out of the back of the C-130 with shovels to start clearing the airfield. I will never forget the picture of literally hundreds of Japanese civilians, young and old, standing for hours to get either a liter of gasoline or a liter of water, all with quiet respect and support for each other. And I will never forget the opportunity to, in a supporting role, to come to Misawa with General Mike Rothstein, the wing commander, and to go to Hachinohe and literally, as he said, General North, you have a small brain and a strong back, so I want you to come help us shovel mud out of the port and the fish arrival buildings so that the people of Hachinohe literally can get back to work quickly to help feed the Japanese people. And I will also never forget, General Oriki, your comment on the JSO standing up in the joint world, and literally Tomodachi and the relief effort was probably, you know, if you will, in the most horrific way, the graduation exercise of a wonderful alignment of an organization into a joint environment to bring capability from all of the self-defense forces to action to defeat Mother Nature and return Japan to the status that it was before the 11th of March. And so as we look at this, I think it's important that we learn the lessons, you know, 1 decade ago and prepare, because we know several things. We know that the forces of nature and this wonderful planet that we live on will continue to have hiccups, whether it's Mother Nature, because of climate change or because of the things that we do as mankind, or whether it's the force of man against man and people against people as we continue to try for primacy. The most important thing, I think, is we learn that we are everlasting allies. We are amazingly strong partners. We are friends forever, and we are actually family. And in that regard, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be a part of the remembrance ceremony. Akimoto-san, as you said, families today are still in recovery. And we just hope and we pray that those who remember this will never forget it, because we must be prepared for the future. In crisis, our friendships are forged in fire. This was a crucible. And in the crucible, we come out stronger. And as Admiral Walsh says, the American soul and the soul of Bushido is joined arm in arm, hip in hip, friendship to friendship. And so it's a privilege to be able to remember with each of you the great East Japanese earthquake, but most importantly, the response where everyone joined hands together to come to a greater good in the recovery effort. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing each of you in person in the future.
Thank you very much, General North. We will make sure that we will have actual opportunity to meet in person next year. Thank you also for your warm recollection of the Operation Tomodachi and the kind words for Japanese people. I'd like to thank Admiral Walsh, General Oriki, General Field, Admiral Van Viskirk, General Bancho, and General North to make today's JUMP event truly meaningful for the future of U.S.-Japan Security Alliance. Operation Tomodachi was the largest joint operation in history between the U.S. military forces and the Japan Self-Defense Force. One of the most important aspects of our joint operation, which the United States and Japan had confirmed, is the meaning of the word Tomodachi. As Ambassador Tomita and the General Bancho earlier said in their remarks, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Americans in Operation Tomodachi were truly friend indeed for Japanese. And of course, being Tomodachi is not a one-way thing. Being Tomodachi is a both-way thing. I'm sure that the Japanese will remember this for generations to come. So thank you very much. Shanti?
All right. Thank you again to our esteemed speakers for joining us today for this special 10-year commemoration of Operation Tomodachi. On behalf of JUMP, Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, and the Embassy of Japan, I'd like to also thank all of you, our guests, for joining us. I know that there are many virtual programs out there that you can attend, so we appreciate you spending your morning and evening for those in Japan with us. As we draw closer to the exact day, 10 years ago, that wreaked catastrophic destruction in Tohoku, I hope we can all find our own ways to keep the candlelight of remembrance bright for those whose lives were lost, and reflect on the resiliency and hope that continues to live on in those who were impacted by all that occurred. Thank you again, and until next time, stay safe and be well. Thank you.